Good evening, and thank you for attending our road safety course. We are Group 3, and I am Christina, and this is
Jacob.
I'm Gabriel. I'm Fahim.
And I'm Leslie, and we're from the Highway Safety Patrol here to give you guys a message.
This evening we will be talking about our 5 most optimizing tips to making the most of your message. Our agenda for this evening will include hooking the audience's attention, structuring your message in an engaging way, taking steps to improve recalls, comparing presentations to other options, using mediums with your presentation, and a brief Q&A session. Along with the 5 key recommendations, we will also be playing a brief video to better enhance your learning experience. At the beginning of the class, you guys should have received a packet which includes a brochure, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and a checkpoint form. Once we get to checkpoint 1, we will go into depth on the instructions and how it's going to go. Again, thank you for attending our session, and we hope you enjoy our presentation. So here we have a brief clip that you are going to view about distracted driving. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, in 2017 there were 3,166 people killed in motor vehicle crashes involving distracted drivers. Often, discussions regarding distracted drivers goes back to people talking on the cell phone or texting, but that's not always true. Distracted driving can include eating, talking to other passengers in the vehicle, changing the radio station, and adjusting the climate. Much like the distracted driver in the video, a distracted audience can cause your presentation to crash and burn. Our first presenter of the evening will be Jacob with hooking the audience's attention.
All right, so whenever you're hooking your audience, you're always going to want to start in a compelling way. In general, you want to start with something that's exciting. As far as an example goes, the premiere of a new movie or the first game of football season. Those are something that has a lot of fans, that draws a lot of attention. You have a crowd, but when you have a presentation on information that the crowd doesn't necessarily know what's coming, it's hard to draw your audience's attention to the front. So there's 3 things that we can do to grab their attention. The number 1 thing that you want to do is include a grabber. Some grabbers are hard to execute, while some are very easy. A good grabber not only gets the attention of the audience, but it also is related to your topic. Some are dramatic, that take a lot of time, and some are easy, as asking an engaging question. Number 2, we want to create an impression. The number 1 thing you can do when creating an impression is wearing a smile. When you have a good smile, it goes a long way. It's very inviting. If you explain why you find your topic intriguing and why it's appealing to you, make sure you convey that to your audience. Whenever you convey something that is appealing, your audience tends to think it's appealing as well, and they'll be more interested, they'll pay attention, they'll follow your presentation. Number 3, you want to end with emphasis. This is a call to action. Your audience is less engaged at the end of the presentation because the ending of a presentation is drawn out. They've waited for that moment, so you want to use fleeting moments such as to wrap up, or let me end by saying. This calls the attention back to the front of the room. The ears and the eyes are back to the presenter, and you are able to end your presentation with the audience looking at you. Next, I'm going to go into some don'ts of the don'ts that you do not want to do when hooking your audience's attention. You don't want to lack enthusiasm. When you lack enthusiasm, you lose the attention of the audience. Once the audience's attention has been lost, it's hard to grab that attention back. Also, number 2, you do not want to be novel. When I mean by What I mean by novel is you don't want to be long, you do not want to be drawn out. When something is long and drawn out, you lose the interest of the audience. Once the interest of the audience has been lost, it's hard to grab those eyes. Their eyes are daydreaming, they're on their phones, they're texting, they're on the internet, so it's hard to gain that interest back. Now my last don't of hooking the audience's attention is you do not want to use inappropriate humor. When you use inappropriate humor, you offend the audience. This can cause a presentation to be cut short because using inappropriate humor can cause an audience to leave the presentation. Whenever they leave, you have no one to present to. Those were my 3 don'ts, and we're going to go into the first checkpoint. We handed out a questionnaire at the beginning of the presentation. If you could go ahead and flip that over, it's going to have making the most of your message on the top. You're going to go ahead and answer the first question. The first question is how and what are some ways to hook your audience in your presentation within your group? You can answer this. You have 90 seconds.
And if you're having trouble recalling, you can always refer to your brochure. The information is on there as well.
And we'll walk around also to answer any questions if somebody has that. Left. 30 seconds. Start wrapping up. Be prepared to share.
All right, if I could grab everyone's attention back to the front. Is there anyone that wants to give us their answer?
One way to hook the audience is just give them something out of the ordinary. Sweet.
Oh,
reading something, just rip it. Rip it out.
Awesome, thank you for sharing.
All right, I'm going to start talking about recommendation number 2, which is structure your message in an engaging way, which is kind of a blanket statement and very broad, and I'm going to help you guys itemize that and drill down and figure out what that really means. So what exactly is meant by that? Well, structuring your presentation in an engaging way not only makes your audience feel included, but it also makes it very memorable for them after they take that information home. So my first suggestion is to be direct. Being direct to your audience demystifies why they are there. They already have an idea, but they're more likely to stay engaged if you're up front and you give them the 5 W's as to what they're going to find out tonight. To do so, the best way to do this is to put your conclusions first. You have the rest of the time while you're presenting with your audience to explain your conclusion and to back up your claim. They're here, so give them your conclusion or your big idea up front so that they're not spending time guessing. Being direct also saves time. In a world of limited resources, so is your audience's attention span. Don't keep them waiting and waste your company's time. We all know that that's money. You must be indirect, like Group 1 previously said last week. Know your audience and know your material. The second suggestion is to group information into chunks. Our working memory only holds bits of data for about 30 seconds, crazy. It is crucial to chunk relevant information together so that your audience can build on their knowledge with you. As a presenter, sometimes we forget that we already have all the information, and we forget that when we're presenting, you, the audience, are absorbing the information as we go along. One good way to help the audience is to categorize your information. This helps your working memory recollection and increases audience retention and attention rates. There is a caveat to this, however. Be careful not to be too specific and use too many headings or sections. Too many categories or chunks, quote unquote, will make it hard to follow and the audience will get lost. It will also give your presentation a very choppy feeling to it. A good practice is to employ a list of 2-sided categories. In this case, that would be a schema. Do's and don'ts, problems and solutions, good and bad, green light, red light. You guys can come up with a list a lot longer than I can. Lastly, you want to create a relevant pattern. This is all about organization. An audience that can't follow what you're saying will disengage almost immediately. In fact, they'll probably spend more time focusing on not being able to follow than what the information is that you're presenting. The best way to do this is to create a structural pattern. Structural patterns include topics, importance, time, contrast, anything that relevantly organizes your information. Finding a theme also helps. Examples of this would be structuring the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the CIA last week, anything you can think of. Some of the last year's presentation did Dr. Mario. Anything you can think of that will help let your presentation be remembered. Finding a theme, explaining sections in preview, and signaling when a new section begins will help to retain your audience's attention or to refocus it if it's lost. Moving on to the don'ts. It's always important to go over good practices like we just did, but it's also good to know the bad ones so that you know what to watch out for. This will help you catch your mistakes before your audience does when you're presenting. Being indirect. While there are certainly some instances that it is appropriate to be indirect, however, more often than not, it will hurt your message more than it will enhance it. This approach is harder to follow and more time consuming. Your audience is there to listen and to gain from what you have to say, not to strain themselves to follow your point or to feel like their time is being wasted. Everyone has heard the phrase, time is money, and that is so true. An indirect approach is both costly and time consuming. Secondly, you don't want to ramble without pause. Like the last slide illustrated, our working memory, surprisingly, is only about 30 seconds before you start discarding information. Run-on sentences, long explanations, and big words will always guarantee an audience tune-out almost immediately. Can I just get a quick show of hands real quick? Who has a friend that you know when they call you, you're only going to get about 5 words in, and then at the end of that conversation, you don't remember why they called or even what they talked about? A decent amount of us. So if you know what I'm talking about, don't be that guy in a presentation. This can also happen when a presenter is rushed for time. Going back to Group 1's presentation, know your audience and be prepared. If there's a time constraint, plan accordingly. Don't word vomit to fit all of your information in. Instead, trim and cut to fit the time frame appropriately. Lastly, you don't want to jumble topics together. This one is a byproduct of rambling and a lack of preparedness. When the information flow isn't logical, instead of receiving the information, the audience will spend more time on not following than the information being presented. When the topics are not organized thoughtfully, information may be given out of context, perceived incorrectly, or not perceived or received at all. This can be avoided by a well-thought-out schema, planned talking points, a relevant structure, and a good source of information to reinforce your conclusion at the end. That concludes my part, so let's go ahead and go to checkpoint number 2. The question is to please list different or new ways to structure your information in an engaging way. You guys can be with your groups, and we have 90 seconds each. We got about 60 seconds left. I know this one's a little hard, so just think outside the box. It doesn't have to be, something crazy, but. About 30 seconds left.
No, I thought we were supposed to make it relevant to our project.
Oh.
All right, y'all start wrapping up. We'll share in just a few seconds. Okay, does anybody have anything that they'd like to share based on what they came up with their group? Y'all think we should?
I guess, more like
Yeah, I mean, it's tried and true, and you know it works, so if it broke, fix it, absolutely. Number 3.
Okay, so just to recap, can I have a member of the audience tell me what recommendation number 1 was? Anyone?
You can look at your brochures.
Okay, great. Okay, what about recommendation number 2?
Structuring in an engaging way.
Okay, yes, awesome. So now that takes us to recommendation number 3, making the most of your message. So in chapter 3 of Guide to Presentation by Glenn Russell and Mary Hunter, the section touched on taking steps to improve recall. First, you want to structure your presentation for retention. As a presenter, you want to use a direct approach. Be sure to list the details that appear on the screen. When using images, be sure to put clear titles. These are known as message titles. Message titles provide the context of the details that appear on the screen. Visual and auditorial aids also help to improve retention. When the audience is listening to your message and sees the image and relates that back to the message, it reinforces key points, which also improves retention. Our next do is reinforcing important ideas. Being repetitive is perfectly fine. That's what you want. You guys want to reinforce the idea. You guys want to keep repeating it so that your audience members can get the message. Including some extra examples and creating mnemonics also help to reinforce key concepts. So this brings me to my 3rd point, scheduling a break. Have you guys ever been in a presentation or a lecture and you guys just feel so overwhelmed by all the information that is given? So I know this probably happens on a daily basis, but sometimes we are fed a lot of information. So a good practice for you guys to do would be to schedule a break. You can schedule a restroom break, you can schedule a stretching break, even a coffee break, or even some time for your audience to check their social media. The presenters can also encourage questions and comments during the Q&A session instead of waiting to the end. Sometimes your audience members will have questions about what you're presenting, and so if you answer those during your presentation, it will help them to be better engaged. A brief pause or silence also allows people time to think and process all the information that is being presented to them. You do not want to overload your audience members with a lot of information. Now we will go on to the don'ts. So our first don't that we have listed is we do not want to leave unconnected dots, which means we do not want to just put random information out and not connect those with the key concepts of the presentation. The presenter needs to ensure that the audience members are getting a clear message on what is being presented. If we do not connect the dots and our audience members do not understand what we are saying, they might feel overwhelmed, lost, or confused. Our next don't is we do not want to forego examples. Sometimes when we forget to give examples of what we're presenting, again, going back to the first unconnected dot, the main concept will not be connected. They will not get the big picture of your presentation. If the presenter, the last don't of taking steps to recall is don't forget to emphasize your key points. You guys want to ensure to reiterate the key points of your presentation so that your audience members are able to grasp the main facts. Now we'll be going on to checkpoint number 3. But before we go on to checkpoint number 3, I need everyone to stand up. Like stand up. Everyone stand up. So we're just going to take 30 to 45 seconds. We're going to stretch our legs, get the blood flowing since we've been sitting for a while. Stretch. Don't be afraid.
Some water.
Take a water break. Okay, you guys can all go ahead and have a seat now. We're moving on to checkpoint number 3. Checkpoint number 3, you guys are going to list some ways to improve recall, and you will have 90 seconds to work with your team to do that.
any questions, we're here to help too. About 60 seconds left. About 30 seconds left. All right.
Can I have a volunteer who would like to give me this suggestion? Yes.
Key concept.
Good, good. Okay, now we are moving on to recommendation number 4, making the most of your message.
Thank you, Christina. So the fourth recommendation we're going to be talking about is comparing your presentation to other options. Comparing your presentation to other options, such as messages or private conversations, is vital in making sure your presentation or the information you're trying to convey is given in the most effective way. There are 3 major do's that we're going to focus on when you're deciding what your optimal presentation style is going to be. The first option is to consider writing a message. Sending a message rather than giving a presentation for non-essential information is a convenient way to, is a convenient situation for your audience. That allows the audience to spend their time on something that's more important, different tasks that are more important, rather than taking time out of their day to come watch your presentation. And as Gabriel said, time is money. Secondly, you have a high control of the content that you're going to be presenting. It's customizable to your audience. If you're presenting to senior VPs or any upper management in a business, they're looking for more of a summary of the information you're trying to present. They're trying to get their in and out quick because they have other business decisions to make. They have other things, more important things to do. But if you're presenting to your fellow team members or your direct management, they might be looking for more nitty-gritty or in-depth information from what you're trying to convey. And the third thing to consider is arranging a private conversation rather than giving a public presentation. This option really stresses the importance of the message you're trying to give, because it could be related to a vital business operation, or it could be highly sensitive information. It is in the best interest of all parties to have a private conversation rather than having documents with this sensitive or potentially sensitive information laying around. Next, we'll move on to the don'ts when you're looking for alternatives. So there are three points that should not be done when giving a presentation. First and foremost is low audience involvement and no engagement, which lowers the interest and the attention of the topic being discussed. If you're not able to keep the audience engaged by hooking them in the beginning, keeping the information relatable, and ending with emphasis, you'll lose your audience. Secondly, don't use the same presentation alternative for all group sizes. As I said earlier, if you're presenting to a couple of VPs, a private meeting might be beneficial. If you're sending out non-essential information, a message in the form of a memo might be good enough. If you're presenting to a whole team or a classroom like you guys, a presentation might suffice. It is imperative to consider the different alternatives to ensure that you convey that message properly. And lastly, the use of PowerPoint slides may not be the best way to convey your information. This ties into the last point of picking an alternative that is right for your situation. The use of a PowerPoint presentation may not be needed if the message can be conveyed as a message or in a private meeting. So now we're going to move on to checkpoint number 4. And the question is, please list any other appropriate presentation options for your presentation. You guys have 90 seconds.
60 seconds left. About 20 seconds. Start wrapping up.
Seems like everybody is pretty wrapped up. Do we have any volunteers to give us any ideas that they came up with? I can pick somebody.
I don't have a paper. I didn't get the question.
You didn't get the questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
You stress the importance of the message.
Okay. All right. That works. Yeah. So now we're going to move on to the fifth recommendation. It's going to be presented by Leslie.
Thank you, Raheem. So before I get started, I want to ask you all a question. Ooh, I'm so sorry. Who here has attended a presentation or a lecture where they walk out of that lecture with nothing in their hand? No questions, no pamphlets, and this does include notes as well. Right. And how much of that lecture do you actually, can you recall at the top of your head? Not much, usually, unless you have a great memory. So in this day and age, with all of the technology that has our attention, 80% of students, actually according to a Harvard statistic, 80% of students said that when they walked out of the lecture, they got on their phones, forgot what the professor was lecturing about, and they could not recall anything unless they had taken notes or they had the PowerPoint presentation or a pamphlet along with them. So what I'm here to talk to you about is how to give you additional information on how to use another medium when you present with your slides that you can use on top of just using your slides. So just to be clear, I'm going to do 3 do's, and then to make sure that my message is coming across and that there's no confusion, I'm going to do 3 things not to do when you're trying to convey which medium to use. So our first one is do and distribute handouts. Handouts can come in any form. It can be email, it can be a pamphlet, a one-sheeter, or even if the lecturer or presenter gives you the option of taking notes. The outcome of this is that the audience is able to follow along with you. This makes them remember your message, and they're able to recall when they leave. The one thing about this is that you have to ask your members not to move ahead of you. This does create some sort of distraction. So if you ask them to go with you along with the presentation, your message will get along just great. Our second one is to include some interaction. Interaction can come in forms of questions and answers, or simply opening up the room to ideas and thoughts, and just opening it up to discussion. The great outcome is that the presentation does become more interactive, and again, the audience will remember your message. Our third one is do go ahead and layer your communication efforts. You want to do this especially when you have complex data, or if you're trying to do a big change in your community, or if you simply feel that you can't get your message across in one 30-minute presentation. The way that you can layer your communication efforts is by doing a follow-up presentation, or a follow-up meeting with smaller groups, or sending a written report to the people that attended your presentation. The great outcome of this is that the message goes beyond your lecture, and your presentation or lecture wasn't just an isolated event. We will now move on to 3 things not to do when you're deciding which medium you want to use. Our first one is do not detach from your audience. This is an important part when deciding, this is important part of using another medium. If your audience see you only as a lecturer and cannot get a sense of your personality, your message will not come across as you'd like. The negative outcome is that your listener too will become associated. You are simply a lecturer, they are simply sitting down and listening. Your message is not going to come across as great. That is the red light. Listener becomes disassociated. Our second one is do not voice continuous information. Who here has that one professor, right when class starts, they start talking, and they're just going through the slides. They don't stop to see if you're getting, they don't present any kind of, like you just said, a break. I mean, does that really work? If you haven't had a professor like that, good for you, lucky you, but I know that I have. The negative outcome is that your audience do become bored. Technology will take over. You have your cell phone, you have your laptop, or you start getting hungry and you start thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner. Your message is not getting across. Great. Finally, our third one is do not ignore the audience's feeling. If you're presenting a difficult conversation or sensitive information, you want to make sure that you're watching your audience. I attended a presentation last Monday in which they said you want to watch what your audience is doing. Body language, facial expressions. If you see confusion or if you see someone getting mad, don't just swift over it. You want to make sure you face that, stop your presentation and say, I'm seeing some confused faces out here. Let's go ahead and talk about it. If you do ignore it, your audience will become hostile. They will leave this presentation with probably some negative comments and your message will not come across as great as either. So we have come finally to our last and final checkpoint, which is list another media besides the slides in your presentation that you can use.
You guys have 90 seconds.
And this doesn't have to be any of the do's that I discussed. If you have any other ideas of how this can be done, I would love to hear it actually.
About 45 more seconds. Okay, about 10 more seconds, start wrapping up.
All right, so let's hear, I want to hear your thoughts. Anybody? Yes.
I guess like one way that I was thinking of was like integrating like cahoots, because you had said that we're already like distracted by technology, so why not use technology as like something to, you know, have people engage with you in. And I think that people probably prefer engaging via technology more than probably any other way. So yeah, that was the medium that I said.
That's
you
really
could
good. I
use.
didn't think about that. Using technology to engage the audience back in. Kahoot actually does require you to take out your phone, and if you're like me, I mean, you have to have your phone in your hand. So using technology to engage the audience and to use a medium to send your message, and it's great. It makes, you know, the Kahoot does questions, so it makes you recall the information as well. So that was a good one. Anybody else? Yes.
Got some handouts and videos that y'all did.
Yes.
It's really good.
Thank you. I think that's it. Handouts are always a good idea. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Gabriel.
Okay, so that just about wraps it up for us. I'll just go over a quick conclusion, and then we'll do some Q&A, and then we'll be done. So today's talk went over various items to reduce distractions and increase message retention. Earlier this evening, Jacob talked about how to hook the audience's attention, what some good grabbers could be, or some creative ways to go about doing that. Following up Jacob, I talked about how to structure your message in an engaging way, how to organize your information, how to structure it, and how to be effective to make sure that that information is really retained as they walk out of the classroom. Christina built off of what I said in order to help improve recall, to help them remember, and to help them keep remembering that stuff after the fact, and to get them engaged even halfway through the presentation when you're in that mid-presentation slump. Fahim showed us other options available to us as presenters. Sometimes we need to consider maybe a PowerPoint or maybe a public speaking venue isn't the best way to discuss something. Maybe it's more appropriate in a private conversation. Or maybe we shouldn't have handouts if it's sensitive information like Fahim said. And lastly, Leslie talked about presentation supplements to enhance your message, just little things to be aware of. Those little things add up and they can be a big deal in your presentation and can really make or break it. So consider these 5 points when preparing and speaking to your audience to ensure that they remain attentive, engaged, and remain what you're communicating. Following the 5 steps in a cohesive fashion will ensure that your presentation does not crash and burn. We will now open up the floor for your questions.
Yes.
One second. You gave a stat from slide 7, but I didn't get to hear what it was. But I know it was you.
From slide 7.
Yeah.
Was it on the 30 seconds of recallable information?
I think so, yeah. Could you just state that again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just didn't
So,
get to hear it well.
our working memory, so basically, think of it as like a computer. Like, your computer is constantly running a program, and it's constantly doing what it's doing, and then it's forgetting what it's not doing anymore. So basically, your working memory is what you are currently focusing on here and now in the moment. And you can actually reference that in the book in chapter 3, they talk about it. It was believed that we could only remember up to 7 bits of information at any given time in that 30-second time period.
Okay.
But recent studies show it to be more about 4 pieces of information per every 30 seconds or so. And that clock just kind of resets every time there's a new topic or every time you're introducing something else.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you for
No
clarifying.
problem. Anything else?
What do you do if a listener does become disassociated?
Yes, of course. So if a listener becomes disassociated, something good to practice is you are going to be watching that listener. You're going to be seeing their body language. They're no longer listening. You want to engage them back in. You don't necessarily want to call on them, but you can pause your presentation or your lecture and just start recalling some of the stuff that you've been talking about. And hopefully that will go ahead and engage them back in. And hopefully they'll just become more of a proactive listener.
Yes.
So if you have a lot of information that needs to be presented on, what's a good way to do that? What are your recommendations?
Okay, so a lot of information, it really depends on your constraints, because obviously this isn't a cookie cutter mold, everything's different in every situation. So the quickest way to do it would just be filter your information and see, is this relevant, is this not relevant? Can I talk about an overarching idea that may cover everything else that will be discussed in that topic? And if time permits, see if you can do 2 presentations. Break it up into a morning session and an evening session, or a weekend, Saturday and Sunday. But there's several ways to go about doing that. You just have to figure out which is the most appropriate and how to structure that essentially. Anything else?
You mentioned the first section for humor, I believe. How would it be better received in, let's say, a diversified audience?
Jacob?
So, humor, you want to stay away from anything controversial. You don't want to add any controversial humor, because that is going to offend the audience. So anything racial,